And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and let's talk about cards that are piling up in my collection. In other words, my actual physical Magic the Gathering card collection. I was going through it the other day, doing some sorting, as Magic players like to do. I myself am very particular about how my Magic cards are organized, and I was going through it, and I was starting to realize that certain cards are really starting to pile up. Like I got 5, 6, 7, 10, 12 copies of them sitting in my collection because they're cards that I used to use all the time and don't really use anymore. There's a few different areas that are being covered here in this video, and this will fall into the category a little bit of, maybe commander staples I don't play anymore, stuff like that, or commander staples you don't see anymore in the format that much, but there's a little bit going into it as well. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. Let's start out with Fateful Absence. 1 and a white instant, destroy target creature or planeswalker its controller investigates. So this card I believe I currently have in 0 decks. I just talked about this in, I think I talked about it, again, the commander staples that I'm taking out of my deck. This card's not that old. Funny enough, there's another card I'm about to talk about that falls into the same category here. 2 mana instant speed, destroy a creature or planeswalker. Even just 2 mana instant speed, destroy a creature was a pretty darn good removal spell when this came out. It was fantastic. This was, I believe, my #1 card from the set because I thought, okay, this is like one of the best removal spells in the format now, right? And of course, I immediately ran out and bought a ton of copies. I mean, I think I might have 8 of these sitting in my collection right now because I thought, okay, going forward, like how could you do any better than this? Going forward, I'm going to want to put this in every deck that has white in it. And then as I build more decks, like how could that ever change? What are they going to do? They're going to come up with a spell that's 1 white mana, instant speed, destroy a creature or planeswalker? That's never going to happen, right? So why would I ever stop playing this? And of course I have stopped playing that. It's funny how things work out. It's still a good spell. I would never fault anybody for putting this in their commander deck. For me personally, I prefer things that are going to hit more than just creatures and planeswalkers in white. If this was a removal spell in any other color, I would still be playing it, and probably everyone else as well would still be playing it. Funny enough, it didn't take long. It did not take long. I ran out and bought a ton of copies of this, started putting it in all my decks, and very quickly it started coming out because we very quickly started getting better removal. So this is maybe a power creep situation. The same can be said for my next card on this list, Infernal Grasp. I have, again, like 8 or 10 copies of this currently sitting in my card box, not getting used. I am still using this. I have it in my 1 mono black deck. That's the only place I'm using it right now. It's funny, we got 2 really great creature removal spells, probably 2 of the best creature removal spells in the format in the same set. And again, I think I had Infernal Grasp #2, Fateful Absence #1. I thought, here we go. I'm just going to run out and buy 10 copies of each of these because every deck I make, I'm going to be using them. And this is less the case with Fateful Absence because, of course, 2 mana, instant speed, destroy any creature with no stipulations at all is still really good. However, even in mono black, getting after those creatures, even this is becoming like, outside of a mono black deck, I don't know if I would really play this card, even though it is really good. Again, we do have the options like the Baleful Mastery, which not only is it exiling, it also can hit planeswalkers. We have one of my favorites that I'm probably going to have to mention in a video coming up now, Lethal Scheme. That card is doing so much. It is, first of all, because you can convoke it, it can be free. Obviously can be cheaper. Unless you have no creatures, 4 mana is not great. But unless you have no creatures, it's likely going to be cheaper or possibly even free. So for all those people out there that love their free removal spells, that is an option. It also connives, which can be really good in a discard theme or a graveyard theme, more likely in black, where you want stuff in your graveyard. And of course, it's also putting +1/+1 counters on your creature. That card is doing a lot. And I'm going to put that in a deck over Infernal Grasp. Likely. This is a card that I got super excited about when it first came out. I'm like, okay, everyone's going to be playing this forever, right? And I guess maybe this video could be cards I was wrong about, because a lot of with a lot of these cards, I thought everyone was going to be playing it, and I ran out and bought a bunch of copies because I thought I'd be using it forever, and it's just not the case anymore. Same goes for Aaid. Aaid is a card that, unlike Infernal Grasp, when Infernal Grasp came out, immediately I was like, okay, that's amazing. Abrade, that wasn't the case. 1 in a red instant, choose 1, it deals 3 damage to target creature, or destroy target artifact. And both of those are great. You're going to kill a small creature. Certainly, you're not going to get any fantastic creatures off the battlefield. Maybe there's a few of them that have a toughness of 3 or less. Maybe your opponent's commander destroying an artifact, you're always going to be able to do. It's not the best target in the world, but, I like versatile removal. And in mono red, there's not a lot of that. After you get past Chaos Warp and Wild Magic Surge, where do you go from there? And Abrade, I thought, was a pretty good one. But once you start playing this card more and more, you start to realize, okay, 2 mana destroy an artifact is not very good at all. It's obviously terrible. 2 mana do 3 damage just to a creature is also really, really terrible. The only thing that makes this spell good is the fact that you have the option. Again, this is a card that I wasn't the biggest fan of when it first came out, but it sort of won me over. Ran out and bought a bunch of copies. And again, I got like 6 or 7 copies sitting in my collection now. It's a card that I am not using, so it falls into the category of a card that I was using for a bit and then took it out of all my decks. It has now been replaced in the one deck where I was using it, my mono red Browin deck. It has now been replaced by Zoyawa's Justice, which came out in Lost Caverns of Ixalan, which maybe is just a strict upgrade to Abrade. And funny enough, I had a patron point this out, and you can watch my review of this card when it came out in Lost Caverns of Ixalan. I wasn't a huge fan of it, because it only dealt with artifacts and creatures, which red does really, really well already, right? 1 in a red instant, the owner of target artifact or creature with mana value 1 or greater shuffles it into their library. Then that player discovers X, where X is its mana value, which of course means they exile cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card with the mana value or less. They cast it without paying its mana cost or put it into their hand. So it's essentially a better cascade. I wasn't blown away by it because I thought, okay, well, it doesn't deal with enchantments or, the things I really need to deal with in a mono red deck. Artifacts and creatures I don't have a problem with, but a patron of mine on the Discord pointed out, is this not just better than Abrade though? I mean, it's 1 in a red instant, so they're on equal footing there. It's also dealing with artifacts and creatures, so it's equal footing there, and it's dealing with it better, right? First of all, if you have an indestructible, like your opponent's Darksteel Forge, for example, which is going to be really problematic. I've been in that situation. If you're in a mono red deck, getting your opponent's Darksteel Forge off the battlefield is tough. Red's not actually that good at removal, so even though red deals with artifacts really, really well, typically indestructible artifacts is problematic, and Zoyawa's Justice is a way to deal with it because, of course, that is an artifact with mana value 1 or greater, and they're going to shuffle into their library. Is there a chance they get it back? There is, just like with a Chaos Warp. That's always the situation. That's what red removal should be. I have no problem with that. How many cards does red have that can deal with a Blightsteel Colossus or a Darksteel Forge? Certainly Abrade can't. Abrade can't deal with any of those. And also, it deals with the really big scary creatures as well, which Abrade can't. It can't get a toughness greater than 4. So this is just straight up better than Abrade. So although I had, I'd probably say about 3 years ago, I started to get won over by Abrade, and I went out and bought a bunch of copies to put in all my decks. Very quickly started taking them out for, again, outside of a mono red deck, just like with Infernal Grasp. I'm not going to play it outside of a mono black deck. I very quickly was like, okay, I'm not playing Abrade outside of a mono red deck. And then as soon as my patron pointed out Zoyawa's Justice, now I have no reason to play it at all. So it's a card that I just don't play at all anymore. And I currently have a whole bunch of copies just sitting around not getting used. Next up, Return to Dust. Again, another Commander staple since forever. They're still reprinting it in Commander sets. They just reprinted it in the Lost Caverns of Ixalan Commander set. So lots of people still using it. Usually it'll take a while, and I'll talk about a few of these cards. It is the case that when you have Commander staples, Wizards of the Coast keeps reprinting them in Commander sets until everyone completely loses interest in it, and then they stop printing it, but sometimes they still keep reprinting it. They might never stop reprinting Return to Dust. Like, it's a good card. 2 white, instant, exile target artifact or enchantment, so it is exile. If you cast a spell during your main phase, you may exile up to 1 target artifact or enchantment. So of course, if you cast it on your main phase, which is always the case, I don't know if I've ever seen anyone not cast this on their main phase, you get an artifact and an enchantment, or you get 2 enchantments, or you get 2 artifacts, any combination thereof. That's pretty darn good. Not bad at all. And you do have the option for, again, the Blightsteel Colossus situation. It's coming at me. I have to cast it at instant speed. I can only get one thing, but of course it's totally worth it because it's going to save my life. Having that option available to you is good. This card is very unique in that way. You don't really see any other card like that. Certainly not a bad card. Again, it's another card that if I saw someone cast in a commander game, I would be like, okay, I wouldn't think nothing of it. For me, though, again, all about versatility when it comes to removal, and there's just no way I'm going to find room for this in a deck anymore. Excise the Imperfect is going to exile a non-land permanent, so it's going to get anything off the battlefield other than lands. It only hits one thing, so okay, you definitely could make the argument that you might want to put a Return to Dust in your deck over Excise the Imperfect. I'm certainly not going to. If maybe there's someone in your play group that likes to play, again, the Blightsteel Colossus, the Darksteel Forges, really powerful enchantments. Maybe they have a Purphoros deck. I might find room for Return to Dust in my deck if I have a buddy that likes to play Purphoros or any of those indestructible enchantment gods a lot. Certainly. It is a card that I used to have in all my decks. It was a commander staple for me. It was in all my decks, and I currently have it in 0 decks. Again, I got like 10 copies of this currently sitting in my collection. Again, this is another one that I've been playing in the commander format since I started playing the commander format. So immediately running out and buying copies. Every time I make a white deck, I use it, and now I'm not using it at all. So I just got a bunch that are just sitting around and will likely never be used again. Let's talk about Burnished Heart. Of course, a commander staple since forever, keeps getting reprinted in all those commander sets again. 3 mana, artifact creature, elk, 2/2, pay 3, sacrifice Burnish Heart, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. Of course, I'm sure everyone is very familiar with it. I might have this in one deck. The deck that I have it in, I think, is my Lulu deck, which is a artifact recursion sort of deck. So having an artifact creature that can sack itself and go to the graveyard that maybe I can get back with my Goblin Welder later, it's actually worth it there. Commander Sphere is another card that I just stopped playing and I don't use anymore. And I could have in this list as well as, I have a bunch of them piled up in my collection. I have that card in that deck for the exact same reason, because it just fits the theme of I can sacrifice it and then get it back. It fits that theme. Burnished Heart, I started taking out of decks for a number of reasons. It's a good card, sure, but it's super mana intensive, I find. And if you think about ramp, of course, which this is, and it's not a terrible option outside of green, obviously. And I would probably not play this on a white deck either, because I think white's got better options. If I'm playing this, say, in my mono blue deck, which I believe I just took this out of my mono blue deck, turn 3, everyone knows how this plays. Turn 3, I want to play this. But you're always hesitant to play this on turn 3. Because, of course, if it just dies, then what do? Now you just played it for nothing. Now, that's unlikely. None of your opponents are likely going to use removal on this, although they could. And if they're smart, they probably would do that. I have had it happen where I played my Burnished Heart turn 3, and of course, I'm going to wait until my next turn to use it. My opponent just Nature's Claims it, because they know it's going to screw me. It's going to slow me down a lot. They're putting in very little effort to slow me down a whole bunch. And they would be right in doing that. Now, would they be right in targeting me and everyone else is doing just fine? I mean, maybe, maybe not. It certainly is going to hurt me a lot if my opponent ends up killing my Burnished Heart before I have a chance to sacrifice it. But even if they don't, we all know what happens here. I play my Burnished Heart, I pass turn. On the following turn, I maybe play a land and probably do nothing because I want to use my Burnished Heart before it gets killed. Likely, like what I always do, is I leave the mana up. So I leave the mana up and I pass turn. Maybe if you're in a mono blue deck, that's worth it because, of course, you have counter spells. You have other things to do. So I can leave the mana up, and any deck where you want to be leaving mana up all the time, it could be good. But most of the time, this is 6 mana to get 2 lands into play, and you're likely going to be using up 2 of your turns to do so. Man, that's a lot, right? I mean, if you really analyze this card, I know everyone has used it in the commander format forever as a ramping option. I just think there's lots of really great options out there, even for colors that don't ramp that well. Colorless options, 2 mana rocks. There's so many great 2 mana rocks now that I probably would take that out over this. I mean, it's doing something different, and it does mana fix as well. In a monocolored deck, I don't think I need this, right? I'm going to get the same basic land, so I don't need that. I can very easily put a mana rock in that just adds colorless mana. That's probably going to speed up the game. And in fact, there's a card I'm going to talk about later on this list that I would likely play over this for that reason. So if you're in any combination of colors, Grixis, I guess, right? So you're in Grixis, which doesn't ramp very well, And this can go get you like a swamp and a mountain. And so it can help mana fix you. It might be worth it there. If you're in a deck, like I said, like my deck where I'm getting artifacts back out of the graveyard, it might be good. If you want to be sacrificing creatures, it might be good, right? I'm in a mono black deck that doesn't ramp super well, and I want my creatures to be dying because now I get a trigger off my Morbid Opportunist. There are still lots of great scenarios for that. But I'm really starting to move away from this card because I really don't love, almost every time I play it in a game, I don't love how things play out. So, obviously I have, this is probably number 2 for me. I think I probably have at least 10 or 12 of these sitting in my collection currently that aren't getting used. Next up for me is Rec Sage. That's right. Reclamation Sage. 2 and a green, Elf Shaman 2/1. When Reclamation Sage enters the battlefield, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment. And man, was I pumped when this came out. It was very similar to Ravenous Chupacabra. When that came out, I was like, I loved it because I love ETB creatures that give you value when they enter the battlefield. And I forever was waiting for that creature that when it entered the battlefield just destroyed a creature without any stipulation. Because again, all of the options before that were the Shriek Maw. There's certain creatures you can't touch. Necrotol, the very old school version. So that made them a lot worse. And Ravenous Chupacabra, of course, had no stipulation. I could destroy any creature. I love that. And I loved it also with Reclamation Sage, which I think was the first creature that did this. I mean, Acidic Slime kills lands as well, but it's 5 mana. Rec Sage was only 3 mana. Just a 3 mana creature that when an ETB destroyed an artifact enchantment, I fell in love with this card. It became one of my favorite creatures. And of course, when I started playing Commander, I started putting it in all my decks because it's a creature that can come down, destroy an artifact enchantment. Great. And then also I can use it as a blocker. Or if I'm in a blink deck, I can blink it and reuse it again. You're in that deck like a Marin deck where you want your creatures to be dying. Of course, they're always great in situations like that. I might have this in one deck. I think I have this in my Tishana deck because, again, that is a blinking deck. Again, I probably have 12 copies of this sitting in my collection currently. I used to have it in every deck. Again, if I had a green deck, it went in there. There have been better options, like Night of Autumn is one I have in my Shanna deck. I actually also have Night of Autumn in both my white-green decks, so I have it in my Malira deck as well. Obviously, that's just a straight-up better version than Reclamation Sage if you're in a white-green deck. Druid of Purification is probably a better version as well. It costs 4 mana, but you're going to get a lot more value out of it, so that's a straight-up better version. I guess it's a combination of things. Even if I'm just in a mono-green deck, I'm going to try to find better options for removal. Again, unless I really want it to be stapled on a creature. If I really want an effect like this to be stapled on a creature, I will use Rec Sage, unless there's a better option, which there is. So I don't know. It's been pushed out by a combination of reasons. I don't really use it anymore. It used to be one of my favorite creatures of all time. So kind of sad to see it go, but there you have it. All right, and lastly today, Worn Power Stone. I talked about this in my Mana Rocks video, I made a video about the Mana Rocks I don't use anymore. Hedron Archive was another one that I was just an auto include in for me in particular monocolor decks, and I make a lot of monocolor decks. So again, that's another card that I have a bunch of them sitting in my collection. Worn Power Stone is by far the most. Again, I'm going through my collection and I'm thinking, I got a lot of Worn Power Stones. Again, that will probably never be used. This was an auto include for me. I put it in every monocolor deck, of course, except for the green ones. I might have even put it in my green decks at some point. It's the fair version of Soul Ring. And especially when I stopped playing Soul Ring, I really went to Worn Power Stone. That was my go-to. 3 mana artifact enters the battlefield tapped and taps to add 2 colorless if you've never seen it before. It certainly is a Commander staple. It's been reprinted in a ton of different Commander sets, and it, again, is still being printed in Commander sets, although I don't know if it gets used that much anymore. I don't use it at all. I have, just like with Burnish Heart, I've taken it out of my decks. I still, and this was the card I was alluding to, this is probably, I was just thinking about it, I think I would put this in a deck over Burnished Heart, because if you do a comparison here, they both cost the same, obviously. They're both colorless, so they can go in any deck. Worn Power Stone is going to come down tapped. You can't use it right away, but of course you can't do anything with the Burnished Heart right away either. I guess if you had 6 mana, you could immediately sack it, but then the lands come into play tapped, so that doesn't really matter a whole lot. You're ramping by 2. Burnished Heart ramps you by 2. Worn Power Stone ramps you by 2. Now, of course, again, Burnished Heart gets you those actual lands if you need that. Although, are you playing a landfall deck outside of green? Probably not. I don't know. Again, there might be some fringe situations. You really want Artifacts or creatures in your graveyard, of course, those options are better there. But pretty much almost every scenario, I think Worn Power Stone is better, unless you really need the mana fixing, like in a 4 or 5 color deck. But then again, you probably have green, so why would you need that? So I absolutely, I think, would put Worn Power Stone in a deck over Burnished Heart. I don't like how much of my turns and how much of my mana Burnished Heart eats up. I can play my Worn Power Stone on turn 3 and then immediately untap and start using my Worn Power Stone right away on the next turn. That being said, even that's not good enough. I don't have Worn Power Stone in any decks anymore. If I'm going to put a 3 mana rock in my deck, it's going to be something that is doing something else. There's just way too many really good 3 mana rocks, like Patriarch's Seal that's going to untap my commander, or Decanter of Endless Water that's going to give me no maximum hand size, or a million other options that are going to be doing other stuff than just adding mana. In fact, and other than a 2 mana rock, I would put a 2 mana rock in my deck if it was just adding mana. Any 3 mana rock I put in my deck, it better be doing something else other than adding mana. That's not good enough for me. So Worn Power Stone is in 0 of my decks. I used to put this in every deck. This is the epitome of what I'm talking about here. This is a card I used to put in all of my monocolor decks and even 2-color decks as well. And now I don't play it at all. I have maybe 15 copies of Worn Power Stone sitting in my collection now, not getting used, and they will never, ever likely get used again. Sad to say. But that is it. That is a bunch of cards. Again, I'm just going through my actual physical paper Magic the Gathering collection and sorting through it, and I'm like, wow, I got a lot of those, because there are cards that I used to play all the time and don't really play anymore, with a few minor exceptions. I think there's like 2 of these cards, 3 of these cards that I have in one deck. The rest I don't have in any decks at all. A card like Burnished Heart, I'm starting to reevaluate. That's a card that I'm taking out of decks, and I might only just have it in one deck. Maybe you should be reevaluating it yourself. You guys let me know what card is piling up in your collection because you used to use it all the time and you don't anymore. That is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.